Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Kathryn Peterson here with my wonderful co-host, Michael Regan. And we are going to talk a little bit about a topic that may help you with your 2025 business plan, which is probably partially complete, hopefully. But this might help you solidify a few of those daily disciplines. And we're going to talk through daily disciplines, what they are, what they aren't. And we're excited to uncover this topic and clarify some things about daily disciplines. So, Michael, let's get things going. Thanks for being here.
You made me nervous. The idea that I've got anybody out there that hasn't at least completed a draft of their 25 business plan. If you felt some relief when Kathryn said that, my feedback would be, hey, don't overthink the plan at this point. Better to have a plan on paper that's guiding the direction you're going, and we modify it as you get new information. But definitely excited to dig into the execution piece, because that's really where the disciplines fall, and some of the project work that you're doing falls is in the execution. And most folks don't draft a plan simply to check a box and say, okay, I have a plan. They draft a plan because their intention is to get really clear on where to execute. So I think that's where we should probably start off on this topic. So lay it out for me, Kathryn. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, so probably better to hear it from your point of view. We have a plan. What should we be thinking about when we look at our disciplines?
So the question I ask myself is, what do I need to be doing daily or weekly? Is normally what I focus on. Sometimes that could be monthly, in order to achieve the goals that I have listed.
Yeah, fair statement. I mean, I think that's pretty plain and pretty simple. So for those of you listening at home or at the office or in the car, just consider how simple that is. I mean, your disciplines really are just that. They are the commitments you make on a regular basis. So whether that routine is daily or weekly or monthly, they're the commitments you make to execute toward the goals that you've set. And so a big miss I see in some plans that seems obvious to everyone in hindsight, but is sometimes just as a miss, is we'll commit to disciplines that are what we would say are like good habits. They're a commitment to things we should be doing on that regular basis, but they're not necessarily connected to an outcome. What's going on when someone has this goal, whatever that goal may be, and then they make a bunch of commitments to these disciplines, but you can't see the dotted line between them? What's going on that someone is that we can help someone be aware of if that's what their plan looks like today?
So I think two things. One, they may not understand the steps to get to the goal that they need, or they may really not be fully interested in that goal and they need to recalibrate the goal. I think those are the two things that I would dive into
Love
first.
love both of those. I'm going to throw a third out there, not to create confusion, but this will create some talking points. Sometimes they may see the goal very clearly and actually see exactly what it's going to take and realize, I don't want to do that. I'd
Right.
like I'd like to achieve the goal, but I don't want to do the work. And that's a sad truth for some folks, is they just don't want to do the work. So play out any of those scenarios. We'll start with the two that you just had. How can we help people if there's a disconnect between the goal and the discipline?
So I think there can be some questions that a coach could ask, like, or ask yourself as your own coach, let's call it that. Things like, hey, if this is my goal, what are the steps to get there? What's one thing that I could do to move towards that goal? And break it up into little parts if you need to do that. Maybe just look at that one goal and start coming up with ideas. Or number two, you could say, hey, why is this discipline on your list? Like what goal is that related to? And how do you see that fitting into where you want to be at the end of the quarter, end of the year?
Yeah, really good. So let's say in that scenario, someone has, in either way you place that. Let's use the second one though. If they've said, okay, I don't know that those two are connected, now that you point that out, how do
Mm-hmm.
we help them maybe go back to the first step and say, let's review if that's a real goal for you.
Mm-hmm.
How how do we walk them through the steps that are necessary? Because for some folks, you said asking questions helps. Let's illustrate that a little bit. What would that feel like to someone who might feel like, okay, I understand what you told me, but I still don't know how to do it?
So I think that that's a good question, but hopefully I have to play the coach for like switching roles here. So I think
You
I'm,
could push it back on me if you need to.
yeah, oh, no, I want to try. I want to try. So I think that you could say things like, hey, that goal seems like it might be something that needs to be broken up. Let's talk through that goal and the different parts of the goal and where you see the biggest lift with the things you're doing to accomplish that goal. That could be one way to do it. Or, hey, is that goal a little scary? So you asked me this yesterday. Is there anything on here that seems a little bit out of reach or kind of makes you sweat? Let's talk through why. Is it that, maybe we need to back down the goal a little bit and, calling 5,000 people a day might be too much. So let's talk through that and see if it's realistic. And then kind of back into it from there.
Yeah, yeah, both of those are great. And I don't want to imply there's a right answer to this. I think what the right answer is what you're doing is start exploring it with them. It's okay
Mhm.
if they can't tell you exactly what the first step is. It's okay if they can't quantify the right amount of time or repetition that they need. Some of us don't true. In fact, this is honestly one of my real frustrations with some of the other coaching platforms that I run into is some folks want to systematize this. Just tell me what to do. Just tell me how many to
Mhm.
do. Tell me how often to do it. Just tell me what to do. Well, the problem with just telling you what to do is everyone approaches their execution with different experience, with different tenacity, with different
Mhm.
personality, and so even communication style. So I might communicate certain things differently than you do. If we both go do exactly the same thing, what if we get different results? Then what do we conclude? Ultimately, what matters is not me letting someone believe the fallacy of there's just a formula, just do these things. It's doing what you asked, which is let's just get the process started. Let's ask some questions. Let's get you to talk about it and what will lead you to take action because action is going to
Mhm.
illuminate where that opportunity gap really is. And that's what you're looking for. The difference between that outcome and that discipline is the opportunity gap. And it's very hard to know how wide that gap is until someone tries stepping into it and realizes, oh my gosh, I'm stepping over a crack or I'm stepping over a canyon. And we just won't know until we get them moving forward. So I like your approach, which is let's start by asking some questions and let's be willing to be flexible with how they respond. Let's just take what they give us and work with it rather than trying to lead them to a formula. So, again, if you're out there listening, um, resist seeking the formula. Yes, there are some best practices. Yes, Kathryn could tell you all about the ways in which she executes on certain disciplines, and you might be inspired by what she tells you. Try to remember that comes from couple of decades of experience, a lot of her personal style, a lot of her personality in the communication that's happening, and you may get a different result. And really don't get hung up on that. Just recognize that then those disciplines might need you to tighten your commitment. I like that you remembered that, they need to make you a little bit nervous. I think the phrase I used was make your palms sweat a little bit. And I like this because all of us feel that sense of anxiety at a different point. So
Mhm.
my goal isn't to push you into a nervous breakdown. That's not a good place for a coach. I don't want to lose trust, but I don't want to let you live in a comfort crisis either, where everything
Mhm.
you do is just easy and sandbagging and not really pushing yourself.
Mhm.
We've got to find where that line is that I can get you to cross into the uncomfortable and then work right there until it becomes comfortable so we can move the line again and move the line again and grow in some of those disciplines. That sound like we
Absolutely.
went the right direction
Mhm.
with that?
Absolutely. And I think that it's important to talk about times to take that what should not be on those daily disciplines is those things we feel comfortable doing. So this quarter, I took off working out because I'm doing it consistently. I don't need a reminder just to make myself feel better about it. I'd rather use that blank on my goals list and my disciplines list for something else that's going to push me to be better. And so there's sometimes, there are people who would like to write something down just to mark it as done or
Yeah.
complete, but that's never going to push you.
Yeah, that's really good. I think if you're listening out there, consider that. Have you found yourself committing to things that are already habits? If
Mhm.
that's you, if you're committing to things that are already habits, you, as Kathryn said, you're essentially giving yourself permission to fill a blank on that
Mhm.
plan with something that's not going to push you because it's already a habit. It might be a really good thing, by the way. I mean, I hope we're all exercising on a regular basis, but if that's a habit, I doubt the real estate it's taking on your plan is going to push the growth you're really trying to feel like something else that might not yet be a habit.
Mhm.
Now that said, there could be an acknowledgement. Somebody's out there thinking, "Yeah, well, I'm always going to stay committed to making my calls. Yes, it's a habit, but they always make me uncomfortable." So there's some wiggle room
Yeah.
here. I don't want to
Yeah.
imply that these things are black and white, but we often know, especially if we're reviewing our plan with an accountability partner, when we're playing soft versus when we're pushing, we're stretching,
Yeah.
and that's our goal with these disciplines is we want them to feel like, hey, there's a high likelihood if I stay committed to this and repeat it, just like we talked about with atomic habits, over time, daily, weekly, quarterly. If I repeat those things, there's a high likelihood that that outcome that I'm truly aiming for is possible.
Mm.
That's the whole purpose of the discipline.
Absolutely. And I think that disciplines can be really fun because you do get to check something off. I was thinking about that today when I did my 5 agent videos, and I was like, you know what? It's nice to know what I'm going into in my day and then doing those things and saying, wow, I've already done those, 3 disciplines that I really want to knock out in the morning, and they're done. And that's always a really, really good feeling. So I think it gives that consistency that I crave, is why I really like the daily disciplines on my planning.
Okay, you just talked about something that I hope our audience can connect the dots with is we really do have two different tools there in one application. The plan was the document you use to create the commitment in the first place. This is what I'm trying to achieve, and this is what I'm willing to commit to do to achieve it. But then we have to move into the regular execution, which is now whatever that commitment was has to show up in our calendar, has to show
Mhm.
up in the day that we're in, and has to get done. You're really good. I think you're a win by noon user of tracking those things that you had committed to so that you can, in fact, celebrate the victory of, okay, did the things today that I said I was going to do. And so if you're listening out there, you know, find a way to tie down that tracking piece because having it in a plan and not having a way to tie it down in a tracking tool, you're missing that opportunity to build that dopamine that comes from, hey, I did it today. I did it today, and I'm
Mhm.
ready to do it again tomorrow.
Yeah. Yep. And that can be, I mean, shoot, I've done spreadsheets, I've done Win by Noon, I've had it just on a piece of paper. So whatever's going to work for you, you can do it that
Yeah,
way.
that
Cause
that's really true.
yeah.
Is yeah, these things don't have, the good old fashioned whiteboard worked for a lot of people for a long time, and
Hmm.
and you're right. Whether it's a printed sheet, I mean, I still look back at some of the earliest meetings I had with our friend Todd Bookspan, and he'd bring out this janky notebook full of all these, like it looked like an art project from junior high where he had taken like sheets that he had made, but he had shrunk them down on the printer, and then he glued them into the journal, and he'd well, this was the original Win by Noon. And he
Right.
was building his own ability to track that. And one of the things I'll always respect with Todd, I respect a lot of things with Todd, but one of the things I'll always respect is he felt frustrated by the lack of a system that worked for him. So he
Hmm.
made one,
Yep.
which sounds a lot like a Todd, a guy who's just willing to go say, hey, if I need to make something, I'll figure out how to make it.
Right. Absolutely. And those people can help other people, just like Todd has. So,
Well said.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think as far as disciplines go, what I've seen some people put projects,
Mm.
things that really should be projects, into disciplines. So, can you describe the difference between a discipline and a project?
So let's describe what makes them similar first and then what makes them different. Um,
Perfect.
both are necessary or both contribute toward the outcome, meaning these both house something that needs to happen for that outcome to be possible. So that's what they have in common. So the reason some people get them confused is they think, oh, well, these are just the things I have to do to make that happen. But when we separate them into two categories, one is a category of things that have a certain repetition, others have a certain completion. And what I mean by that is that if I am committing to a discipline, I'm committing to repeat an activity on some cadence. You mentioned a few: daily, weekly, monthly. These are activities that I'm going to commit to do over and over again.
Mhm.
So it's the same activity repeated. That's a discipline, where a project is going to be an activity that I commit to complete by a due date, whether that's a day on the calendar or a time of day on a certain day. Like there is a
Mhm.
completion. And when I've completed it, it's over. It's finished. I don't have to repeat it over and over again.
Mhm.
And so that's the easiest way to demark the difference between the two of them. But I recognize why people get them confused, because I think, well, it takes all of this to accomplish my goal.
Mhm.
And that is probably true. It's going to take a combination of regular commitments to discipline and regular commitments to execute on some improvement projects. And the combination of those should lead us to the results that you're aiming for.
And I'm going to give another example because I think this is where people that I see get confused. So let's say you have a daily discipline of reading a nonfiction book for 15 minutes a day. That's a daily discipline or a discipline. Versus if you have as a project, I'm going to finish Atomic Habits by February 15th. So it might be that in order to make that project happen, you have to do something daily, but it's two different things because really you're saying one is a little bit more broad, but will happen every day. Regardless of when you finish Atomic Habits, you're going to move on to the next book. So I think that that's why you can get confused too, because yeah, you might have a project and you might have to work on it every day, but you're going to finish that project at that point. And so it can, like, one of your daily disciplines could be work on my projects for 20 minutes every day, right? But that's different than a project with a completion date.
Yeah, I think we talked about this on a previous episode, but you just reminded me of an example that a lot of people resonated with during COVID. So very popular 5 years ago for people when we found out that, oh, suddenly my home is going to be my, my restaurant, my entertainment venue, my church, whatever I do, it's here at home. It also became our gym, and people had to
Hmm.
buy equipment. And Peloton, you remember this company that used to exist that made all this really great
I
bike and
still have
treadmill
one.
equipment,
So
as as many people do.
yes.
Unfortunately, their stock not so great. But let's make this a lesson of what was happening in 2020
Yeah.
when the company was doing great. I would often see on a focus plan that product would show up in all three categories. And here's how. So, first of all, they might have had a goal related to the exercise program they wanted to commit to with Peloton. So, Peloton has a whole series of
Hmm.
video based digital programs. And so they wanted to complete one of these programs. That was the outcome. Of course, the discipline was then the routine and the schedule of doing these things.
Hmm.
At some point, the project list was things like, I got to buy the bike by this date in order to, I've got to buy the little clip on shoes that I need that fit on my pedals,
Hmm.
because when I use my tennis shoes, I don't get the same results as I do when I have the real bike. So all three showed up in the plan, but they were all working in harmony toward the ultimate outcome. So
Mhm.
it is possible, to your point, that some of these things do have a relationship with each other. And that's okay. And this is where, as a coach, I've really learned to not get persnickety. If at some point someone is, for whatever reason, stuck on, well, that's why I see it this way and that's why I see it that way,
Yeah.
ultimately what I'm going to tell them is it going to help you get the results that matter to you? And are those results moving you toward even bigger, like your annual goals or your bigger vision? If
Mhm.
all of that is moving us in the right direction, tomato, tomato, I will not die on the hill of, well, that's a discipline, not a project, because that's not really helping someone move forward if I just want to debate them on semantics.
Mhm.
But what I will do, back to your point of the question, is I'll ask them what their intentions are, because sometimes the opposite happens. It almost frees them up like, oh, I get it now. Okay, well, now I know where to put that and how to schedule that and now to how to celebrate it when I complete it. I couldn't, they just needed some help figuring out what did we
Mhm.
mean. So I'm really glad you brought up an example like that. And I hope my Peloton example is just another illustration of what that might look
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, that does make sense.
So, Catherine, I want to ask you one more question on this one. So, you're obviously, we've done probably, 20, 25 focus plans over the years. I haven't done a head count, but let's say quite a few. Let's say
Yeah.
over 2 dozen. And sometimes those focus plans are exercises that are done with really good intentions and lead to really great execution. And other times they're done with really good intentions but not so great execution. What's been your experience? And this is where you can either speak from personal experience or at least things you've observed working within a culture of other productive people. What's the difference between always good intentions, but sometimes really great execution
Mm.
and sometimes not? What do you see?
Two things. One, visibility. How close is it to my hand at all moments? And how often am I actually looking at it so that I remember what the disciplines are because they aren't in my brain, they're on the paper.
Mm,
And then number two, am I doing my daily disciplines or my disciplines in general? And that's honestly most of it are those two things.
love that. So the visibility one is huge. I think we've referenced our good friend Patrick Palmer a few times, and I know you work directly with Patrick. One of the things I love is just about any time I'm with Patrick, and I say just about because we certainly see each other sometimes outside of the work environment. But anytime I'm in a work environment with him, if he's got his backpack, he's literally about 10 seconds away from pulling out the documents. He's carrying his life plan, he's carrying his business vision, and he's carrying his
Mhm.
focus plan. And he can pretty quickly show you where he is at that moment. So visibility matters. So you're right. Whether it's you're physically carrying it with you or you've laid it out on your desk, I see some people tape that thing up on the wall. I mean, it's fun as a coach. I'll sometimes get, people will take their little selfie snapshots of here's me and I'm doing it. It's here. I see it. And I celebrate that with them because you're right. Visibility eliminates the first level of excuses. Oh yeah, I forgot about
Mhm.
that. No, it's right there in front of you. The second one you mentioned, the actual doing of the disciplines. This is the one I would say for me is it's got to transfer into your calendar. Whatever those disciplines are, have to transfer into your calendar. If you don't transfer them, they just become intentions. That's
Mhm.
all they are. They're not disciplines, they're intentions. To move them from written disciplines into actual execution, they've got to go in your calendar. So whether that's on the personal side, we've talked about things like, a workout routine or a reading routine. Those are great examples. Or whether we're on the professional side, and these are, conversations you need to have, whether those are phone calls and meetings. These could be events that you're participating in. These could be committees that you're serving on, where lots of different applications out in the business world. But if those things don't get transferred from that plan into your calendar, the likelihood of consistency goes
Mhm.
way down. And so we want to help you get them off of the page and into your calendar so that now when you have that visibility, it's working in harmony with your actual calendar. Pretty hard for your integrity to stare at that plan, stare at your calendar, and still say, yeah, but I'm not going to do it.
Mhm.
So that has been my experience for sure, and I hope for our audience that's listening out there that they feel some sense of understanding that we've got to be able to uh, take these plans and make them practical, make them easy,
Mhm.
make them something that aren't complicated. And I hope some of the things Kathryn and I've shared with you today are helping you see, okay, this isn't so complicated. I'm making it complicated, and you're finding a way around that. Before we close out, Kathryn, any last thoughts on disciplines or projects that you feel like would be a helpful tip to someone who's here in January? Their intentions are high, but they haven't yet really shifted into their execution.
So, two things. One, I would say that what might be good is reevaluate those disciplines a few times to say, hey, are these disciplines actually getting me to here? And then number two, I think if we can just quickly name some examples, because I think people sometimes have a hard time being creative around these. So I'm going to ask you just to fire off 5 examples of a personal discipline, and then we'll do the business side too.
Okay. So on the personal side,
Mm-hmm. Yep, do
so
that for one first.
yeah, so good example. Well, I guess we have to relate them to an outcome, right? We have to have an outcome that we're shooting for.
Yeah.
So pick an outcome, and then I'll riff some disciplines. What are we
All
aiming
right.
for?
Let's see. How about um, lose 20 pounds? Just
Okay,
because that one
perfect. That's
shows
a,
up
that's a
all the time.
common one, especially
Yeah.
in the new year, right? So the first thing I'm going to suggest is you got to look at the holistic view of your health. One is going to be related to your routine of eating. So the first discipline we might create is more meal planning. So meal planning could be a discipline. Portions that you need, quality of food that you need, meal planning. Second is going to be around the times in which you're eating, because sometimes that's a big factor in losing weight as well, is giving your body an opportunity to optimize metabolism, which means you're going to maybe break fast, the original word for breakfast,
Oh.
at a certain time of day instead of just getting up and starting eating. Maybe your body will benefit in that in that journey to weight loss by creating different times in which you're going to eat and also stop eating at the end of the day. Then third might be taking a look at how you are going to track that eating. Do you see a theme here? A lot of people want to focus on exercise
Yeah.
first, and I'm going to start with what's the fuel we're putting into our body? Because if we're willing to do those things, if we're willing to meal plan, if we're willing to time our meals appropriately, and if we're willing to track what we're eating, we can make the adjustments we need, because we need a calorie deficit if we're going to lose some pounds, no doubt about it. So that should lead to a fourth. Let's make sure we have a regular routine of motion. And when I say motion, I mean exercise in the purest of sense. If you haven't been doing any, maybe walking is where we start. If you've been walking, maybe it's running. If you've been walking and running, you may need to start, doing something else more rigorous like bike riding. But that's a cardio piece. That's an easy one. I think the fifth is we need to add some actual weight, because muscle mass is going to help burn fat at a faster pace than just cardio. Cardio by itself is not going to lead to your goals in most cases. But if we combine those five, those are 5 disciplines right there that would help us lose 20 pounds. And now, because of the third one, the tracking, we can make adjustments as we go. We're not just waiting till the end of that month or that quarter to see if we hit our results. We've got a tool for tracking. So how do we
Hey,
do
I'm
with
going to
five
be a nerd
disciplines?
because you answered it like a coach, which is good because you want people to be creative around it. But I also want to give somebody a concrete example of the word. So the daily discipline for, I'm just going to give one example for eating at certain times might be always eat breakfast before 7 a.m. Eat breakfast daily before 7 a.m. Never eat past 6 p.m. So just have those concise, um, those the more detailed you can be in the daily discipline, the easier it's going to be to maintain versus words like set daily eating time. So if you have those a little bit more bundled up, I think it's a lot easier to hit that. Work out 3 times a week, lift weights 4 times a week for at least blah, blah, blah. So that kind of stuff will help you really dial in the words to your daily disciplines as well.
Great. I like it. I like it. Okay.
Okay.
You want to go to the other side?
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay. Pick the outcome.
All right, let's do how about 5 referrals a month from an investment advisor?
Okay. So this sounds a lot like my clients who are in the housing industry. They might be
Perfect.
looking for referrals from someone who's on the financial advisory side. Okay, so let's create some disciplines. I think number one is creating a time block in which we're going to work on this exercise. So the discipline number one is having a daily or weekly routine that is specifically time blocked for the very specific purpose of that. So that's a discipline. Let's jump down to the project list real quick because I think added to that, we need to
Hmm.
actually create a list of who are some of the financial advisors I already know, and then who are some of the professionals I know and trust that I could seek a referral from if I need more on that list than the ones I already know. So that'd be a good project list to make sure that
Hmm.
this time block I'm going to use has some horsepower. Then I would make sure that, two, I've got a plan to make outbound communication. I'm using that phrase carefully because
Hmm.
if that plan is 5 calls or 10 calls, we might be living in a world where a call is really a text, or a call
Hmm.
is really a direct message, or a call is a video message. I'm not fussy about the delivery system. I'm fussy about, do we have the discipline of making the outbound communication? Because that's a starting point. Then, third, I might set the discipline of a quality conversation. How many of those outbound communications can I get to result in a quality conversation? And in this example you gave of, I'm trying to meet 5 new financial advisors to do business with, I might want to make sure then that it's a conversation about the business we're in, the real estate business. So until we have a real estate related conversation, maybe that's a threshold. You could
Hmm.
set your threshold wherever you want, but I might want to set in my discipline something specific that says that's the definition of my quality conversation. Fourth discipline, how many of those can I convert to a live meeting, whether on Zoom, like we're doing, or whether in person? Because that's where I can further that conversation and build trust in the relationship. That'll lead to the fifth, which is the discipline of securing commitments. And the commitments would be the commitment to create a mutually beneficial business agreement where I'm going to help you and you're going to help me. But I've got to work through all 5 of those disciplines if I'm going to hope that those 5 meetings are actually going to produce the results that I hope for, which is
Hmm.
doing business together. All right, how'd we do there?
Oof, that was impressive. This is why it's good to have a coach because I don't know if anybody could come up with them as quickly as you did. And I would say give yourself some grace too, because Michael's been doing this for a long time. And so he can come up with those. It would have taken me a lot longer to do that. So I'm glad that was your question and not mine.
Well,
But that was
it is
awesome.
true that we've talked about those, but if you really slow those down, and again, I guess the beauty of recordings is you can
Hmm.
go back and rewind and listen to those. These are all things that we've talked about, you and I, and we've talked about as an industry for a long time. And I want to make sure as we leave this topic, we realize these don't overcomplicate it. Like those simple disciplines, whether it's
Yeah.
I'm going to lose 20 pounds in the next quarter, or I'm going to build 5 new relationships with a financial advisor where we're exchanging business. Like either of those outcomes are ones that require some really fundamental execution. So I'm going to suggest in either case, yeah, let's make sure we're willing to do the fundamental execution before we start getting
Hmm.
into, hey, I've got this fancy social media campaign, and hey, I've got this, great new marketing idea. I'm all for branding and marketing, but I always like to start with the fundamentals.
Yeah. And that's really the daily disciplines. So that does give us a really good lead in to close this episode out. We talked about daily disciplines today. Hopefully, we gave you some new creative thoughts around your disciplines, and hopefully, that helps propel you into your goals for this year, next year, or the quarter. So, certainly reach out if we can help with anything. We'd love to have any comments on the episode, or feel free to share this episode with someone you know might be working through their daily disciplines or modifying their daily disciplines. Thanks so much for listening to Building Bigger Lives. Any last minute comments, Michael?
Yeah, if this week was your first week out executing on your disciplines and it was not an optimal week, erase the slate, pick pick a fresh week next week
Mhm.
and do it again. And if next week is a little bit better but still not where you wanted it to be, that's okay. Raise the bar again, erase the slate and do it again. So many people get caught up in the perfection of thinking if it's not exactly what I said, then it was a fail. And let's don't make this a pass fail year. Let's make it a growth year, because if every year I can get you to get a little bit better with your disciplines, the results are real. It's no different than when I go see my trainer in the gym. I'm going to have to just work on lifting a little more weight, doing a little more reps. But if I give myself permission to look back over a long period of time, I'm muscling up, and that's all I'm asking you to do.
Absolutely. Great advice to finish us off. And please listen on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. We'd love it if you share, give us a 5-star. Thanks so much for listening to Building Bigger Lives.